Justin's out sick and it's super late. So this is definitely a after dark old school edition of Locked On Guardians. We've got news around baseball to talk about. We've got some trade talk that's starting to get on my nerves, as well as we did most underrated last time. Let's do who's the most overrated prospect in the Cleveland Guardians system. All on today's Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show today. You can start the season off with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. For those who do not know, I am Jeff Ellis. I'm one of your two co-hosts here. I have been since the start of the network. They always say every podcast is somebody's first time. So that is why we do introductions, and it is just a reminder, network mandated. Before this, I was a lead draft and prospect analyst at Scout 24/7, and before that, I wrote at every Cleveland sports blog that has or will exist. At least it felt that way. There's been some minor news. If you've been following me on, Blue Sky is, listen, I'm dropping the same tweets at both sites. I interact on Blue Sky. I don't interact on Twitter. That's how this works. But if you can follow me on whatever your preferred social media is, one of the things that has been kind of annoying me is the fact that baseball's offseason is so cruddy. It's a countdown clock for everyone else's, and a bunch of things happen. And I understand this is what happens when you don't have a salary cap. There's other ones, everyone's positioning themselves so they can go out and make those moves. And I guess, theoretically, no cap is better for the players unless it's slowly killing the sport and taking money away and allowing it to not grow as a sport. And that's a debate for another day. And that's a debate I am probably not equipped to really enter into. I am certainly not an econ major, but it does feel like without a cap, this is the only sport where the off season is boring, for lack of a better word. It is, we get these spurts of interestingness, and then no one cares. And I don't think that's good for the sport. Like, you look at what the NFL has done to make them a very, the powerhouse that they are. Yes, everyone loves football, but there was a time where football was not the number one sport in this country. That is a relatively recent thing. And one of the big parts, it's like, they get the season all the way through what, goes into February. I believe, like, I'm not a big football person anymore, but I believe like March is free agency. April's the draft. You get your rookie camps. Then in May, June might be what you got your post, another set of cuts in June, right? And then after that, you get training camps at the end of July. Like, they've managed to have the smallest number of games and make their season last for a whole year, where fans are actively checking in. And baseball manages to have an off season where basically, instead of actively checking in, everyone goes away, which I can say happens just looking at our numbers. Season's over. If you are a Cleveland Guardians fan, you just know there's probably going to be, 5 to 10 things that happen max during the offseason. And we appreciate those of you who tune in every day. I always default to a few people out there, but I can also go and say this. I know on YouTube, it sits there and tells me who our big commenters are if I go in the YouTube studio. So I'll just go ahead and shout out John, Anthony, Kalen, David, and Jeffrey. Those are our biggest commenters on YouTube. So thank you to everyone who's being an everydayer, even as not much happens for the Cleveland Guardians. Let's be honest. One thing that is happening is we're starting to see some dominoes fall, though. Last week, you talked about Yusuke Kikuchi and his deal with the Reds. Blake Snell gets a nice big deal with the Dodgers. I'm a little confused. Maybe you can comment below. I don't know why the Dodgers jumped on Tommy Edman. I understand maybe they think cheap for him. They gave him the equivalent of 5 years, $15 million for an undersized guy entering his 30s who's had some health issues last year. They could just had him for one more year and then seen maybe I'll look foolish in the end with that, but that one surprised me. But the Snell deal is kind of the big story of the weekend. I think we would all agree. He gets his 5-year contract. That is one of the arms off the market for all the arms the Dodgers have had. And hey, they won the World Series last year, so it works out in the end. No matter what happens, that they just keep spending. Again, maybe the sport really does need a cap. The thing with the Dodgers here is they add another former Tampa Bay arm with some injury issues. They gave him a lot of money. We'll see how it works out. Overall, Snell started out very slow. He clearly missed spring training, but then he was awesome down the stretch. I assume he moves in the flattery role. I know Walker Buehler probably isn't going to come back, is what it feels like. But I think they're also hoping Ohtani can pitch next year. And they have, approximately 15 guys on the 60-day disabled list. And even that doesn't exist now. Once the season starts, they'll have a bunch of guys on there. And they also lead the league in injured arms every year. It's, I don't know, great development, but it does lead to a lot of injuries. So I'm kind of curious to see what happens overall. But, Snell's one of the big dominoes off the field. And we mentioned Kikuchi. And then tonight, Frankie Montas, another Boris agent. I don't know if Kikuchi is Boris or not. But Montas got $34 million, which, I've talked about. I don't think anyone knows how to evaluate this postseason group. I saw the news that MLB Trade Rumors thought he would get $11 million for 2 years. Instead, he got, which it comes out to 2 years, $22 million. He got 2 years, $34 million. It's a lot of money to the Mets, who are like, they're like over 50 million under the luxury tax, and every year with Cohen, they've been over it. So the Mets are going to add more. This is just the start. This isn't going to stop them from adding more pitching, more than likely. But yeah, they went out and they got Montas. It does have an opt-out, so if he pitches really well, he can just keep playing the opt-out game, which is what he did this year. He didn't even pitch that well, but he still opted out. And he's heading back to New York, which didn't go well the last time. But, he's an interesting pitcher, a guy who's had definitely some ups and downs. The Mets have Cervino, Manea, and Quintana, who are all free agents to fill in. Cody Sengai should be healthy. And after that, it's a bunch of fives. So I'm not shocked to see them go out and take a mid-sized gamble here. But the issue is, like a lot of places, okay, right now with baseball, the other problem too in the offseason is we just don't have a lot of coverage, and it's not necessarily great. And I find myself reading Jim Bowden because, hey, at least he writes a lot. I've talked about many of my issues with him in the past. But it was interesting when he listed like his top eight pitchers for free agency the teams could consider. He didn't even mention Montas. Who did he mention though? Were Boyd and Bieber. So again, not a perfect situation, not the strongest of evaluators, but it does make you wonder, like, is someone like Boyd looking at 2 years, 30 at least right now? Like it does. Montas is interesting because it makes you reevaluate Boyd and Bieber and what they could get, because this does potentially raise floors. It does potentially shift what players can get. It makes me more feel like, okay, Jose Quintana and Patrick Sandoval on lesser deals, here we come. But I'll go back to my last solo show. Was that last Monday, where I talked about this team. We don't know about the TV contract. Like, that is the biggest caveat I can give. We don't know about the TV contract. The numbers that came out of San Diego were pretty terrifying in terms of the drop-off amount, and we're talking less than 50% of earned revenue. That's why teams that Bally's wanted to keep, the Guardians were not one of them, agreed to take 25% pay cuts, 30% pay cuts, because 70% of unguaranteed was better than whatever you're going to get guaranteed from Major League Baseball. So, last year we thought they maybe were preparing a little bit for this eventuality, and teams did get pay bonuses to make up for the gap. They're not getting that this year. So there is this world where, again, I think operating expenses wise, they're somewhere around 30 million below where they were a year ago because of the money they spent on the draft as well, and the difference in that situation. Maybe it's closer to 25 if we're being a little more cautious with money. There's a world where they think that they might lose 25 million in TV revenue. And you're out there going, hey, they only made like 50 million a year. Yeah. I think there's a world where they're looking at half as much this year. So I do think, though, I'm very curious to see if they do have some room to spend, if they do end up spending. The news around baseball, unfortunately, though, is not great for this team in general, just because of the situation where, starting pitching is going quickly. It always goes quickly, and guys are getting a little more than was expected. It is interesting seeing all the Boris clients start to chip away. We still don't have the Soto news. That'll be a big piece in all of this. And, people keep bringing up Roki Sasaki for a lot of teams. Let's be honest, he's going to pick where he wants to go, and it doesn't really matter in the end. Outside of that, he's probably going to go to a pretty big market squad, because that's what makes sense. But yeah, I think is going to be hopefully starting to pick up. We'll see a little more things going around. We do have the Rule 5 coming up with, we'll see. Cleveland, currently has an open 40-man spot after everything that went down. So, potentially maybe it's like someone. I don't see too much there. I'm sure we'll do a preview before the time comes. But we're going to come back, and I'm going to talk about some of the things I'm reading and seeing, and just kind of discuss the idea of trades in general, and like some of the theoretical trade talk that gets a little out of hand, all in today's Locked On Guardians. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. I mean, the Blue Jackets right now might be a good team to bet on. They're on a hot streak. If we're going to keep it positive, I will only mention the Blue Jackets. Cavs, of course, we're going to lose, 2 games all year is what we're deciding now. So a lot of good Ohio teams to check out over at FanDuel. So that's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. And we are back. I do want to sit there and thank you all for joining us. As always, thank you again to everyone who's an everydayer who's sticking with us during the long, cold off season, especially cold if you're like me and your heat decided to not turn on this evening for various points. Always an exciting time in Milwaukee. But let's get into what's driving me a bit nuts. So I see this all the time, and again, reading Jim Bowden pieces, what do I expect? But and I get the logic. Like he agrees with me on this, and he's letting those trades post so he has something he can kind of kick around and kick at. But the biggest faulty thing in sports is this idea of aggregation of value. You can't put together 3 C's to get an A. It just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in a grade book when you're doing averages, and it doesn't work that way overall. The only team last year putting together C's to bring back B's was Atlanta, but Atlanta was also taking money. So they were getting like pieces more because they were eating money than because of the pieces they were trading away. They were kind of doing it through part, we'll trade for this guy, we'll eat this much, then trade him this guy. And then this team, they were manipulating things as best they could to try to get their money on the line. And you know what they're not doing this year? That they are, instead of trying to spread their money out and use it that way, they decide it's better to just go invest it all in trying to get 1 or 2 players. Maybe we'll have to see what Atlanta does. I mean, they let go Canning and Laureano, so those were some interesting decisions. I don't think all of us expected. But yeah, I see so many people bring up these ideas of, well, why don't we? It's right now it's like Arias, Freeman, and I'm trying to think who would be the third piece of we're talking guys who are on the very fringes of this roster to try to get back value. And that doesn't happen. It's the same way for 5 years. Every Yankees fan started every trade offer with Michael Andujar and Clint Frazier. Or if you go back before that, every Cubs fan with Matt Scherzer and Junior Lake. And we can keep going back. And those trades just aren't going to net value. And fans love to, because if you play MLB The Show, you can just keep adding pieces. It was the joke with the Blue Jackets trade this weekend that it felt like an NHL hockey game trade because you just keep adding draft picks until they accept. In this case, you can't trade draft picks in Major League Baseball, so you can't just keep adding guys because in a lot of ways, when you add, if you're going out there and let's say you're talking with another team about Gabby Arias, they don't want you to add Tyler Freeman. They don't want that. Or if they're talking about Tyler Freeman, they don't want you to add Gabby Arias because every player you add is someone that either has to pass through waivers or they have to cut someone from their 40-man. Almost everyone's 40-man is at max. There's some wiggle, but teams don't want to give up their wiggle if they have it because some of them are looking to be active in free agency. So this whole idea of aggregation of prospects, trading and I should say 3 failed prospects. Let's be honest by now. I still have some hope for all of those guys to be at least backups. But if you have not turned into a consistent performer yet, your trade value is nil. It just is. You're interesting as a third piece. You're interesting as a fourth piece. But Gabby Arias isn't headlining for anything. Ty Freeman isn't, headlining for anything. They maybe could have netted you Cal Quantrell, who, just got cut. Like that's the level of deal. It's one of those, or they're the fourth piece in a deal. There's just this tend to think there's value where there isn't. I mean, I'm as guilty as anyone. Was it like a year ago or 2 years ago? No, many years ago. Back, I thought Bradley Zimmer had some value. I was talking with Joe Doyle, wanted to trade for him. I'm like, Joe knows a lot of people in the industry. I was talking with someone with the Twins who thought that, and then he gets traded. I can't remember the guy, comment below the pitcher they got from the Blue Jays for Bradley Zimmer. In the end, he had such little value. Teams are looking for consistent performers. They don't want to trade for guys who have had opportunities and haven't run with it. If you're going to use a player in a trade, it's got to be someone interesting, someone who's near ready to compete, or someone that has not failed multiple times. Yes, development is not linear, and sometimes players can turn around and become solid producers. We talked about a lot of guys on this Guardians team. Jose Ramirez being a prime example of a guy who struggled and then eventually figured out. But teams, if they're trading for someone, don't want the guy who struggled. They want ceiling. They want upside. We've had some recent talks with some people on the Alfonso Rosario trade. And again, I'm telling you, I wouldn't be shocked if he ended up traded later this year, because it's all about the tools and less about the player. And ceiling is what you can flip. You can't flip unrealized potential. Like you can flip potential. You can't flip unrealized potential when given opportunities. And I think that Cleveland very specifically has set themselves up in the past year to add a bunch of high school pitchers. Why? Because for the next 2 years, they'll all maintain their trade value. Now, some of them might develop, and they might also trust in their ability. But at the same time, this organization, the best pitcher they've developed since CC Sabathia from the high school ranks is Tristan McKenzie. And if you want a number 2 off the top of my head, I can't tell you who that is. Like, they have been really, really, really bad with high school pitcher development. It's almost non-existent. You go through what happened, in recent years. It's like players that were not acquired in trades and or college players. It's like Danny Salazar, Tristan McKenzie. Those are your success stories. Sam Henches, one can make a case, is their most successful high school pitcher outside of Tristan McKenzie, drafted in the last 10 years. So that's why it's interesting they went so heavy in pitching, but they did it the year before that, and then they traded both of the left-handed pitchers they had drafted while stock was still high, even though there were, some concerns. So that is what teams want. They don't want the guys who have come up and been unsuccessful or have failed to knock down a starting role to prove that they can be everydayers. They want to trade for upside and potential. So when we're talking theoretical trades, the one thing I just want to stress again and again is, if you're coming at me and putting together the poo-poo platter of guys who are barely on the 40-man roster, it's just not feasible. Because again, teams have to cut guys to add them. If you want to come around and instead say something like, Gabby Arias, and I need to be more. I think you could actually trade guys from last season now in the draft. From the draft, now it's the off season. Could be wrong in that. I know it's not wait a year anymore. But I was trying to think who, like, the other high school pitcher I can think of, for instance, is like Keegan Zinn. Now, if you want to talk about something like, now Zinn hasn't quite put together as much as Bresnahan or Clemmy did. That's the situation you're kind of looking at. It's like, if you want to talk about one of those 3 guys, and then a prep pitcher, if you want to talk about them, and then someone like a Rosario, or if you're going bigger, someone like a Churio. Those are the deals that make sense. But I think it's just one of those things right now I'm currently getting annoyed at. And the other thing is, I know I'm running out of time here, is if we took all the trades Cleveland has made involving like teenagers, like trading teenagers away to get, take shots for guys on the rock, like basically, the Junior Caminero deal. Like we fixate on that one because it didn't go well. But most trades for young kids work out for the team. I guarantee it'd be a bigger war over the last 20 years for those trades as against them. So I see a lot of people discussing trades right now, and I also want to do the media literacy thing. Please, please, please don't believe clout chasers. And it's very easy to see who the clout chasers are. There's going to be people, this was the time a year ago with made up deals left and right that popped up that were clearly just people lying because they wanted attention, saying, "Hey, look at me." Don't trust those accounts. I think right now, could they make a smaller deal? Yeah, I think that's the type of stuff you're gonna look at and consider. Those are the type of deals maybe you look at. I do think at the end of the day, there's a very good chance to keep Josh Naylor. The other interesting thing with this is I saw Mike Petriola talking about first base production has really declined rather massively over the last 5 years. So Josh Naylor is still a top 5 or so guy, 5 to 10 rate. Sorry, pause there while I coughed. But Naylor's in that solid 5 to 10 range. You're not going to get a whole much back for him. So it really sets up Cleveland in a situation where they don't have a ton of trade assets unless they're trading prospects. And it's been a very prospect huggy organization traditionally. It's not to say they haven't been able to. Look at this past deadline. They made the gamble on Cobb. They made the gamble for Thomas and traded away some relatively high prospects. But I am curious to see how things shake out. I think, unfortunately, for this podcast, they're going to wait in the weeds like they always do. They're going to see if they can find a deal, see if they can find some players, and they're just going to wait and see what develops, see who gets desperate, see how things shift and change. They're going to take a lot of calls, and not a lot's going to happen. But the one thing I do just want to stress again is, don't be a Yankees fan. Don't be the fan base, making up silly trades with all the guys that you just don't want on your team anymore. Or and the other thing is again the media literacy. Just don't trust it. It's like growing up. Don't trust strangers. Everyone on the internet's a stranger. don't trust everyone on the internet. Trust. People are proven. Newsbreakers. Like, don't trust me to break news. I occasionally get things. Often I sit on it because I was told to. So I don't even get to break things. But like, who's trustworthy, who's not. So now as we're going to get into the silly season, just again want to stress, be careful who you're following. Be careful who you run with, and because some random dude on the internet says something, just don't necessarily believe it because you're desperate for wanting something to happen, because it's baseball. And if you're a small market team, we are all desperate for something to happen. We're going to come back here at the show, and I feel a little bad about this next section, but we talked about some underrated prospects. I want to talk about the guys who are maybe a little overrated, more in fans' eyes, or it doesn't mean that these are bad prospects by any means, but we're going to come back and discuss some prospects who maybe we fixate on a little too much on today's Locked On Guardians. But first, I feel a little bad here. I'm stealing Justin's favorite sponsor to talk about. This is what happens when you're sick. I get to sit down and talk about his favorite sponsor. Now, I have not had a ton of experience with Game Time because since I had kids, I have not gone to many events. If I was going to events, I would certainly be using Game Time. And why would I use it? Because I sit here and talk with Justin, second most to anyone in my life outside of my wife, and all he does is rave about Game Time on and off the mic. This is the site he loves to go to. This is where he buys his tickets. This is where he and his wife go to a lot of events together. And this is the first place Justin goes. So that is the ultimate, endorsement to me. Like, this is what he uses. They may be a sponsor, and that's how he discovered them. But since then, this has become the place for him to get all of his tickets. And, they have all-in pricing. You just toggle it to see what your final cost is going to be, so that way there's no surprises. You can get that seat view, so you can always see a panoramic view of where it is. Lowest price guarantee. Who doesn't want that? I mean, that just means if they'll credit you 110% of the difference if it is not the lowest price. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Could be on anything they have site-wide. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download the Game Time app. What time is it? It's game time. got to do all the little bits and pieces. I want to recommend you go check out any of our great friends on the network. Sully on Locked On MLB. I always love Javi at Locked On Padres and Bryce of Locked On Rangers. Great hosts all around. Lots of people that I have really enjoyed interacting with over the years. So again, I want to state this again so it doesn't get me in trouble. But I think it is valuable to sometimes talk. We talked about underrated prospects last time I had a solo show. So I want to talk about who's maybe a little overrated. Now, I talked about this before going into the break. None of these guys are bad prospects. I don't want them to be like, I don't like most of these guys are going to be players that are in my I'm not doing a top 100, my top specs data sheet. If I go look on my guard specs data sheet and compare it, but guys that I just think maybe there's a little too much hype on right now. Maybe we are very different in valuations and locations. MLB.com has not, I don't believe, has updated theirs, but I think there's some areas there to discuss. And let's dig in. I know people expect me to say Chase DeLauder. I mean, I agree with his placement everywhere. I just have more concerns. So not him. I think he is properly hyped. I think if it works, if he stays healthy, he's going to be a big league bat. So no, if you're expecting that from me, I'm sorry. That's not what you're getting here. I am a little bit lower in the field on him, but no, he's not the guy here. So when I look through like MLB.com's top 10 list, two guys in the top 10 really I didn't think should be there. So I'll start with that. Welbin Francisca, I think he's a really interesting prospect. There are people who love him to death. I know a year ago, I've been too busy with life to work at Prospects Live this past year. There are people doing great work, and I love everyone over there. Go check out Prospects Live. I'll give them a shout out now. I just have not. I've been overwhelmed. The day job has been too much this year, and I don't have the time to work there. But I know a year ago, like they were insistent. Welbin in the top 10, and the reason I think he is overrated is if I were to put two reports in front of you, and one was Welbin Francisca's and one was Brian Rocchio's at the age of 18, you couldn't tell them apart. And Rocchio, listen, he looks like he is going to be a major league player. So, hey, that's great. Maybe Welbin should be a top 10 guy. It is a profile that is fringy. And what do I mean by that? There's not a lot of standout tools. And the one tool that is the standout is hit tool, which we have proven that no one can evaluate well. So for Welbin Francisca, it's like people love the swing. I mean, that's great. That doesn't, a swing doesn't tell me anything for the most part, unless it's really awkward or has an arm bar or has too many moving pieces. I think until we actually see him play at higher levels and get some more data, right now it's all hype. And like I said, it's a profile that we've seen a lot of players in the system have and not be successful. So if you took, Welbin Francisca's and Tyler Freeman's and compared them when they drafted Tyler Freeman out of high school after maybe his first year in the minors, not necessarily right out of high school, when he started to, get a little more hype after that first year, I bet they'd be very similar as well. Like, it's just a dangerous profile in that regard. And then I feel bad here because I do like CJ Kayfus. MLB.com has him 6th in the system, and I feel like he might have family who listens or follows me, and I think CJ has a good. He's performed better than I thought he would, but he hit a bit of a skid last year in AA. He doesn't necessarily have big exit velocity, and hitters who move up can sometimes stay the new guy, the new face, the fresh face, and when you move a hitter up a lot in a year, they don't face the pitchers multiple times. So they kind of stay a bit of an unknown, and they're more likely to get challenged more. And I think that also benefits Kayfus. I don't know. I have him 12th in the system. Like I said, I think he's a very good prospect. He has a chance to prove me wrong. Again, it's just a profile and being more of a first base only guy for me. That is just not as valuable as well. He can probably play a little bit of outfield, but it's not something they've had him do. So I think in this situation, like those are two guys, just again, I'm using kind of the MLB list to look at where I'm like, oh, that is a strong disagreement. Another guy for me who, as I go down their list, they've got Robert Arias 16th. He's not even anywhere near my top 30 for a lot of the reasons I talked about with Francisca. Like, I'm not gonna rank a guy just because he got a lot of money and he's well thought of. Like, I need to see him play against real competition. At least with some of the guys like Chase Mobley, who's also 18, and some of the high school kids, I got to see them face other elite high school players. I got to go through and talk to people who saw them do that and got to see those levels of performance. So I have a baseline. For me, it's a little bit harder. And then, we're talking about guys that they could, flip, or those high value prospects. I think that was supposed to be what Jackson Humphreys was. And, he's still in the MLB.com's unupdated top 20. I don't think he'll be there when it resets. But you look at Humphreys and Zibin, were the, 2022 version of like Brezhnev and Clemmy. And then they weren't very good in 2023, so they didn't try to trade pitching. And then Zibin got hurt, and Humphreys hasn't really advanced as much as you'd like to see him advance for a player at his age. And I just think it's a hard situation because you gave both those guys a lot of money. And unfortunately, I don't know if either of them are top 30 prospects right now. And that stings because they do like to gamble on the high school guys because of that maintained value. But when there just hasn't been production, I don't know if the valuation is going to be there. And then, we didn't talk Jackson Humphreys like at all during the season. We talked about prospects, right? Like, that's one of those things that kind of stands out. We are known as the podcast that goes deeper on prospects. We don't even go that deep, if we're being honest. But you can look through and kind of see who we talk about and who we don't talk about, or who doesn't make themselves be someone we talk about. And, just again, going through this list, most of these players are guys I have in my top 30. The only guys on the MLB list who are nowhere near my top 30 are P.D. Halpin, Jake Fox, Jackson Humphreys, and Robert Arias. Everyone else made it for me, or is at least pretty close. Halpin and Fox, I think at best are backups. So there's that situation with those two. And then the other player I have to talk about, and this will, and maybe I'm doing too much of no reaction, getting annoyed at people just scouting stat lines, because that was like CJ Kafis got a little too pushed by a few sites who are only stat based. The Tugboat is a little overrated right now. He has two solid secondary offerings, but as we have seen with like Will Dion, who, listen, I bought the hype a year ago. And from what I understand, the reason Ryan Webb wasn't protected is the same situation, is that Wilkinson has with Webb and with Dion, also lefties, is a flat, 45-40 fastball, and that you can't necessarily be successful with that. Now, maybe he can continue to improve that pitch. He's a, relatively young kid. We've talked about all the ways he can improve, and he had a really impressive year this past year. But if you have even a semblance of control, you'll dominate low and high A. And he does. And if you have good secondary pitches, that will allow you to do that as well. And, Tugboat's more hype than progress right now. He's a fun prospect. He is in my top 30. I'm actually probably calling him overrated than he is. I have him in the low 20s on my personal list. I've kind of him, Webb, and Casey all around each other. But it's like, when you're looking at those three lefties, Casey's the only one who has a chance to have a 55 fastball right now, from what I see, what I judge, and what I gather. Like, that's the one guy, and that's why they protected him over Webb. Like, the fastball, we are seeing teams move away from this idea of like, you have to throw nothing but fastballs. We've seen guys who don't throw it even a majority of the time, but it is still a pitch that most guys throw 35% of the time or more. And when it's a substandard pitch, guys feast, especially at the big league level. So that's the thing that stands out there. I am kind of curious to see how we can continue to develop. I wouldn't put it past him to make me eat those words in a year. But the thing I'm just always I love stats. I love numbers. I think there's a lot of value you can take from them. But if you are only scouting a stat line, you're going to get your heart broken a lot in scouting minor league prospects. You're going to be like me and think Cord Phelps is the answer. Because when I was almost strictly a stats based guy, like that was the dude. That's one of the first guys who I'm like, well, what went wrong? Like statistically, a lot of things looked right there. Wes Hodges was another fun one. Matt Laporta had great numbers in the minors. There's all those guys. But that's why you need more than just the numbers. You got to look a few different ways. But again, all of these guys are pretty solid prospects. Like none of them are guys I'm saying are non-prospects. A year ago, I got myself in trouble when I said that about Noel. I can own up and say I got that wrong. I just think that right now, based on the talk, the number of questions I get here related on the show with those certain players, as well as like just, looking at the national rankings, I think there's a little bit of a disconnect. I would gladly be proven wrong. I will always state that. I would rather be wrong and there be more talent than be right every single time. I'm always happy to be wrong when it's something that benefits the Cleveland Guardians organization, because I do try to report, but I mean, I'm also a fan. I want to thank you all for joining me. I want to remind you all to rate and review, download daily. It helps. Follow us, set those downloads to automatic, and especially during this time of year where there's nothing happening, we appreciate everyone who is showing up all the more. Justin, hopefully, will be back tomorrow. If not, I will probably do a mailbag, so send those questions in, or I'm sure we'll have one this week at some point. Thank you all, and go Guardians, go.